We are in the remote section of Essex, Connecticut today, Jeff.
We're in the southern part of the town heading toward the old Saybrook border. I mean, there's tons of trees, and the fall foliage is really spectacular right now.
It is. The colors are amazing, especially as the late afternoon sun hits them.
So we're heading to the former Buck Hill district in town, and you can pull over right up here.
Well, there's not much around here but forest.
Yeah, that's the thing. We're going to have to bushwhack into the woods on this one. So just over a century ago, there was a house out here that made the news several times in the span of just 2 weeks because it was haunted by a ghost. And not just any ghost. A ghost with a nose for beer. Hello, I'm Jeff Belanger.
And I'm Ray Auger. Happy October. We've been mostly exploring haunts this month, but we're always on the lookout for all things wickedly strange in New England. You can head to our website anytime and contact us with your story leads. You should also join our New England Legends Facebook group. We're over 10,000 strong now.
Not bad at all. So we'll explore this controversial Essex haunt right after this word from our sponsor.
A ghost with a nose for beer? That's my kind of haunt.
I know, right? So relatable.
And we're looking for a haunt that used to be here?
Correct.
All right, but now it's not here.
Right.
While we make our way through the woods, here's a little more background on the town of Essex, Connecticut. The Saybrook colony was first established back in 1635, where the Connecticut River meets Long Island Sound. Saybrook colony was huge and eventually divided up into the modern towns of East Lyme, Deep River, Chester, Westbrook, and Essex. Shipbuilding was one of the major industries in this area. There was plenty of trees for lumber, and boats could be launched into the river, then make their way to the ocean. By the early 1900s, other industries moved in. There was an ivory company making parts for pianos, and a wire company producing metal wires. It was very much a working-class town in an ideal location in those early days.
Working-class folks are central to this week's story. A story that got a lot of ink in the newspapers just over a century ago, because there were hundreds of witnesses to a local haunting. Now, this haunting divided the town of Essex. Some called it a fraud. Others called it the real thing. To find out what happened, let's head back to the year 1915 and meet the Brown family.
It's late January of 1915 here in Essex, Connecticut. Over in Europe, a huge war has been building for the last 6 months. It's a subject that's on everyone's mind. Folks are wondering if the United States is going to get involved. So here in Essex, when news of a peculiar haunting started to circulate, it's a welcome distraction, if not a contentious one.
That's true. Now, not everyone believes in ghosts, but there's been enough buzz around town that people want to take a closer look for themselves. It all started back on Friday, January 23rd, at the home of the Brown family in the Buck Hill district of Essex.
The Brown home is in rough shape. It's run down. Living here is Mrs. Charles Brown, Edna Wood, and her sister, Frank Brown, and a few other family members who come and go. The home is owned by the daughter of the late Mrs. Catherine Brown, who lives in Lima, Ohio. Her intention is to sell the house, which will make her kin homeless.
So back on Friday, 17-year-old Edna Wood came to stay at the house. To give her a place to sleep, they pulled an old metal cot out from the attic. And the first night, the strangest thing happened. There were disembodied knocks on the wall. So Edna knocked back. Pretty soon, Edna began communicating with what she claimed was a spirit making those knocks. By asking a series of questions, establishing 1 knock for yes, 2 for no, and so on, Edna claimed the spirit was none other than the late Davy Brown, who used to live in this house.
The others who shared the house with Edna were gobsmacked. Pretty soon, others were called in to witness this miracle of spirit communication. Folks in Essex made the trek a mile through the woods and marshes to the Brown's house just to see for themselves.
And sure enough, many witnessed what they believed to be a miracle. The medium, in this case Edna Wood, sits in her cot bed, people ask questions, and the knocks respond. Questions like their age. Questions about other people in town. If a knock can respond, it knocks. Dozens of people make the trek out here to the marshes to see for themselves. Now, some scoff and cry foul. Others believe it's the real thing. And one of those believers is Steve Doan.
I don't believe in spirits or ghosts in the first place, but I do say there's something about this thing that ought to be explained before anybody starts calling it a fake. I heard about the spirit and the way it answered questions, and I went around the place. When I got to the house, I asked Mrs. Brown if I could ask the spirit some questions. She said I could, but Edna would have to lie on the bed first. I says to the spirits, "How old am I?" It starts rapping, and it raps 50 times. "You're right," says I. Then I asked, "How old was I when my mother died?" Spirit rapped 6 times, and I says, "You're wrong." "Let's try it again," says the girl, and the spirit raps again, 3 times, real loud. "Correct," says I. "There isn't a soul in town that knew it until then. I want to know how those raps told those things and got them right if there wasn't something behind them. Didn't the spirit tell Earl Helsinger that he had 4 bottles of beer in the wagon outside when he asked? Then Helsinger got up and left the room, saying he was afraid somebody would swipe them when it was known they were there."
The ghost knew that there was beer outside in the wagon? I think we finally found indisputable proof of the paranormal.
You think so?
I mean, you got to admit, that's a strange thing for a ghost to figure out. And to get the age of Steve when his mother died?
I agree. It's peculiar, but still, not everyone's buying it.
There's almost 100 people gathered here at the Brown small house tonight. Many are outside waiting for their turn to come in. But 2 of the women who are currently in the bedroom with medium Edna Wood are Mrs. Frank Torrey of Essex and Mrs. Harriet Heflin of nearby Old Saybrook. Both are spiritualists here to investigate the phenomenon. And they smell a rat.
So the Brown family claims the spirit only replies in this one bedroom, and only when young Edna is sitting on the cot.
After hearing the knocks reply to questions asked, Mrs. Torrey notices that Edna keeps her hands underneath the bed covers when the knocks are happening. So she asks the girl to pull her hands out. Edna pulls out one of her hands and they still hear the knocks. So Mrs. Torrey asks her to pull both hands out at the same time. Yeah, I don't hear anything.
Me neither. And just like that, Torrey and Heflin cry fraud.
While many in the crowd start to disperse, folks like Steve Doan remain convinced. Newspapers like the Hartford Courant covered the story. Debates rage on at the general store in town, but over at the Brown house in Essex, those knocks go quiet.
So what happened?
Well, Edna Wood claims that the 2 spiritualists who came to visit,
Mrs. Torrey and Mrs. Heflin.
right, them, Edna claims that those women took the spirit of Davy Brown away. And that's why she can't communicate anymore.
That's pretty curious.
Now, even more curious is the for sale sign that now sits in front of the house. The skeptics claim that the Browns made up the whole ghost story to try to give the house a haunted reputation so Catherine Brown couldn't sell it. And the family could continue living there. And that brings us back to today.
But the beer, Ray, the beer. The ghost knew about the beer.
The ghost of Davy Brown was clearly our kind of ghost.
Okay, so this story got a lot of ink in the Hartford Courant between January 25th and February 11th of 1915. Multiple stories covered the saga. The case was even reviewed by the Connecticut State Spiritualist Association.
I guess in the end, believers will believe and doubters will doubt.
And that's always the way. You have to remember that by 1914, spiritualism was still sort of new. Though it officially launched in 1848 with the Fox sisters in Hydesville, New York, hearing knocks on their wall, the idea that certain people can communicate with spirits really took off in the 1860s during the Civil War. And every time there's turmoil in the world, the belief in ghosts gets another spike.
And in 1915, World War I was bubbling up in Europe. America was getting close to sending troops.
Right. Plus, people really want to believe in ghosts, especially in another person's home. Preferably not where we live, but yeah, if I can visit a neighbor and see something, well, that would be validating. I'd firmly believe in an afterlife and everything that goes with it. Of course, the reality of ghosts has been proven to millions of individuals all over the world, but I doubt everyone will ever be convinced. That's just not the way the world works.
I get that. But a ghost who knows where to find beer sounds like the perfect paranormal sidekick. Now, if we could just get a ghost to buy us a beer, we'd be all set.
That would be amazing. Which takes us to After the Legend, where we take a closer look at this week's story. Sometimes veer off course. Hey, you know who sort of buys us a beer, Ray?
Who, Jeff?
Our Patreon patrons. I mean, sort of. Our patrons are the best. They help us with our production and hosting costs, our marketing, everything else it takes to bring you 2 episodes each week. It's only $3 per month, like buying me and Ray a beer that we have to split. And one of those cheap domestic beers at that, but all good. And for that, they get early ad-free access to new episodes. They can get our entire archive of shows, plus bonus episodes and content that no one else gets to hear or see, like our next New England Legends television episode. We'd love you to help out at patreon.com/New England Legends. And to see some pictures of the Brown House in Essex, Connecticut, click on the link in our episode description or go to our website and click on episode 369.
It's all in the hands. I mean, just reading this and going back in time and seeing that.
Right.
The hands are everything. I mean, come on.
Right. So, I mean, the newspapers, by the way, the articles were riveting. There was like 6 of them, and they speculated early on that this family was going to lose their home. It was owned by a family member who was in Ohio, who wants to sell it and just be done with it. And they're like, well, if we make it haunted and no one wants to live here, then, great, we can probably live rent free. I assume
decent motivation behind it.
There was, and the knocks on the wall. So it's always curious when a miracle only works with one person in one room in one place while she's in the bed in the cot with underneath the covers.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like that's peculiar.
This is how the ghost likes it.
That's a lot of variables. You know what I mean? If it's just the medium, she gets the messages. That's one thing. If it's just the room, okay, we can buy into any one of those one things. We can be like, okay, it's got to be this room. Cool. But when the formula, the recipe gets too complicated, we start to say, come on.
Well, the ghost doesn't like hands.
Right.
She should have said, everyone hide your hands because the ghost does not like hands.
Yeah. And maybe that worked for the first 200 people. Right. And someone's like, you know what?
And that's because most people want to believe.
Of course they do.
Right.
Yeah.
And we don't I've been excited before because something happened.
Yeah.
And then it gets debunked and you're like, oh, that's sad.
Because but once in a while, something can't get debunked.
Right.
Where you're just like, I can't figure out what caused that.
Yeah.
And then you go, I know it wasn't like blood pouring out of the walls, but it was really peculiar.
Sure.
And I can't explain it. That's what I live for. Those are moments that I live for because you have an obligation to explain it if you can. If something weird happens, you have an obligation to look into it and say, all right, is there a logical reason for this? And if you strike out, cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool. If you're like, oh yeah, you know what? There's a draft by this door. It's making the thing flutter. That's what did it.
Yeah.
But if you're like, nope, there's no draft.
There was a couple ghost shows, and I can't remember which ones, where that was the point. Like they would try to debunk anything. And when they didn't, it was very cool. And if they did, it's like, well, of course it was the window's open in the back room. It's windy out.
Right.
And that's, sad, wah wah. But every once in a while, it's like, yeah, we can't deny that, or we can't say yes or no that there's a ghost here.
Well, inconclusive is still interesting.
Yeah.
Because lots of time, like, footsteps in the attic. I had a friend who was investigating a house and he said, we hear footsteps in the attic. I mean, footsteps. And he goes in the house. It's like, okay. And like, hear it? And he went, yeah, I do. Like, oh my. I mean, right now, like there it is. So they go up in the attic and there's just a big raccoon up there.
Oh, with shoes on.
Yeah. And you're just like, oh dear. So we still have a problem.
Yeah.
Right.
You just got to call somebody different.
But I'm not the person to help you with this problem. Yeah. So sometimes, you are hearing stuff and you want to, what conclusion do you draw? I don't know. I love it. I love that when you live somewhere, you understand the sounds that house makes very quickly. You don't have to live there a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks. And now, like the door
That's
creaks.
The heat going on.
Yep,
right.
The heat ticks that wall.
House settling.
The hot pipes are in this wall. And when it's cold out, they're going to make thump, thump, thump now noises. You figure that out super fast. And when everybody's in their place, like maybe your whole family's in the living room watching a show and you hear someone walking in through the back door and you're like, wait a minute. Everybody that's supposed to be here is accounted for.
It's a different sound.
It's a different sound. And you leap up and you say, someone just broke in. And then you see the door's locked and no one's there. And you go,
that's something.
Wait a minute.
Call Jeff.
But the knocks on the wall thing, like that is an homage back to the spiritualist movement. Like that's how it worked.
Right.
And to this day, I've been on many paranormal investigations. One of the most powerful triggering sounds that people do, it's my favorite. They're like, all right, let's see if we can get a response. Ready? Here we go. And they go up to a wall and they go like this.
Because then you're dealing with a lighthearted spirit.
Right.
If they
Shave
knock back.
and a haircut. 2 bits. Come on, say it back, right?
Right.
Because no tune can resist.
Yeah.
As we all know. From
I'd be
Roger
nervous
Rabbit.
about a paranormal entity that didn't respond to that.
Right.
Because there's just no sense of humor.
So there's a horror movie idea, right? Like you're on the wall, you're like, and then boom, boom, and the wall comes down and this demon comes out and you're like,
I like that. Write that down.
Yeah,
Don't take that, folks.
no,
That's our
it's-
idea. We
this
just
is-
heard it here.
Yeah, this is
on
gonna
record.
Be great. This is going to be great. So the knocks on the wall thing is always a curious. I mean, that takes physics.
Yeah.
right. You have to exert energy against a hard
And I suppose
surface.
you also have to like push it so that it doesn't sound like it's coming from behind you, or
Right.
maybe it was the bed frame she was hitting.
Yeah.
If her hands were down there, you want to make it sound like it's coming from somewhere else.
The speculation was that it was an old cot. It was against the wall, and she could move the mattress
Oh, right,
just
sure,
right.
yeah.
That would make it thump against the wall.
Yeah.
But with I don't know. So I mean, that was the.
Hey, good for them.
theory.
You know, they tried.
They did.
They
and
got some attention for a while.
They did, and a lot of people came to see it. But what I love, so on the one hand, though, the curious thing was the witness that we heard from, where he said it knew, and there was other stuff too, but we just sort of clipped it a little bit. It knew how old he was. Okay, fine, it got it wrong. But like when you meet a grown adult who says, "How old do you think I was when my mom died?" Like, okay, fine, childhood, I guess, right?
Yeah.
But what are the odds you're going to guess that number correctly?
Right.
You know, if you don't know this person.
Yeah, yeah.
And she got it in 2 guesses. First was 6 and the next was 3. I mean, I don't know. That's
Pretty good,
awkward.
but then you're dealing with a like a psychic who's really not a psychic, but knows how to manipulate people.
I guess.
Right.
And then the beer in the wagon thing, I'm like, all right, let's picture like some Jeff or Ray type character that came around to see this. It's like, I sense that you have 4 beers in your
I can
wagon.
smell
Really?
it though. I can smell it on your breath.
There used to be 6. Like, oh my gosh, she's good. I'm leaving before someone takes my beer.
Right.
So yeah, but yeah, there's some curiosities, and I think that's what you heard it from the witness who said like, okay, fine, maybe she's making the noises, but how would she know how old I was? How
Right.
would she know my age? You know, like, okay, lucky guess that she knocked 50 times. You know, I mean, so anyway, it is a curiosity, but then it all ended abruptly when they were sort of busted.
Yeah, but they had their 15 minutes of fame.
They did. It's how it goes sometimes.
Please hit the subscribe button before you go. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll bring you weird stories from New England twice a week. Plus, most of our story leads come from you, so please contact us anytime. We love when you get involved.
We'd like to thank Michael Legge for lending his voice acting talents this week. Thank you to our sponsors and our Patreon patrons. And our theme music is by John Judd.
Until next time, remember,
The bizarre is closer than you think.